It's great to have people here with us for these sets of meetings that are not so familiar with SRFSI. And it makes it all the better to celebrate everything that we've achieved throughout this project. But in order for them to understand what we did and where we got to, I think we also need to go back and establish how and why SRFSI was established and the different phases that we've gone through in SRFSI. So let me take everybody back a whole decade, back to 2011, which is our project code in the ACS system, and look at what we were trying to achieve through SRFSI. So to start with, here are what I hope are 4 established facts that we all agree on as to what was happening in the Eastern Gangetic Plains in 2011 when SRFSI was conceived. The first one is that farmers had a pretty tough existence. Poverty was quite dense compared to other regions of the world. Second, farming systems were not productive and could not provide enough to enable household food security for farmers across the region. Thirdly, farmers faced many problems in achieving productivity, profitability, and sustainability from their small farms. These include constraints with small landholdings, access to irrigation, credit, quality seeds and fertilizers, and formal extension services. Farming communities were also increasingly experiencing scarcity of farm labor. And fourth, the region was also predicted to be one of the most impacted by climate change. Yet farmers had little capacity to innovate and adapt to this and other challenges they faced in farming. In summary, being a farmer in the Eastern Gangetic Plains in 2011 was hard, and it was increasingly becoming harder and more complex. In 2011, a scoping study undertaken through ACI suggested that conservation agriculture-based sustainable intensification could provide some solutions to the problems that farmers in the Eastern Gangetic Plains were facing. However, whilst CASI had been proven in other parts of South Asia and globally, it had not yet been proven in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. And so SRFSI's story began. The first thing that SRFSI wanted to do was, given that it was shown to work elsewhere, could CASI help resolve farmers' productivity, profitability, and sustainability constraints across the Eastern Gangetic Plains? Now, if that could be proven, the second thing that SRFSI wanted to do was to look at how CASI could be promoted to enable smallholder farmers to use CASI practices across the Eastern Gangetic Plains. So that's the why of SRFSI, but what about the how? So we've said that the first stage of SRFSI was to prove that it was relevant in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. So the first thing that needed to be done was through proof of concept, and this involved the many field trials that were done throughout the first phase of the project. We also had the beginnings of partnership brokering, making sure that everybody knew what was going on, that everybody was building their capacity together, learning together, coming together to ensure that if we were able to prove CASI, the key change makers would be part of that process. That is essentially what we were trying to do in phase 1. Then came phase 2. Now this phase was particularly deployed around capacity development, making sure that key change makers knew about conservation agriculture practices. And a lot of that also came through support, experimentation, and demonstrations. This in itself was aimed to stimulate the localized adoption of conservation agriculture as a twofold way of proving conservation agriculture across the region and stimulating local adoption. Of course, if you get these two things together, what you then get is widespread CASI adoption. If it works, people know about it and people are starting to use it, and so the snowball will start rolling down the hill, accumulating mass, accumulating speed. The third phase of the project really looked then to ensure that this was packaged and completed in a way that the impacts and the momentum could continue beyond the life of the project. So the first key thing that we wanted to do was make sure that this was packaged in with policies, with programs, with organisations, and that would survive beyond the SRFSI project. The other thing that we wanted to do was then that confirmation of concept. So we have the proof and then we have the confirmation. When you put that together, you really get a strong case that CASI belongs in the fields of smallholder farmers in the EGP. And of course, all of these are then linked together. What this means is that in practice, SRFSI went through 3 distinct phases, although as we've seen, they are all interrelated. The first phase was around establishment of a CASI knowledge and scaling base, getting everything ready and making sure that CASI is relevant to farmers in the region. The second phase then really focused on capacity development as a pathway to institutionalization, to convergence and to successful longevity in scaling of CASI. The third phase then took a more holistic approach that looked at all of the other different elements that come into play. So really each phase building on each other until we get to phase 3, which is really about understanding how to scale CASI more widely across the region. Each of those phases had its own project leader. So in the first phase, we had Dr. Mahesh as the leader, establishing the field trials, establishing the knowledge base and building that scaling base. In the second phase of the project focused on capacity development, the leader was Dr. Tipi, and then I took over for the third phase that focused on scaling. So what we have now is I've asked that each project leader of their respective phase reflect on that phase, and particularly what was the purpose of that phase? How did that phase implement its activities? What new knowledge or outputs were generated? And why was that phase so important to understanding and scaling CASI across the EGP?